Thank you. It's always good to get the right slides for your presentation, isn't it? Because much as I know a lot about some things, I certainly don't know a lot about the other things that were there. So first off, I must say I am delighted to be here. Somewhat amazingly, this is my 20th visit to Kuwait, which I think makes me almost kind of local, doesn't it? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. However, my Arabic is appalling, so I will speak in English. And I have to warn you too, because I'm in a rush now, I tend to speak quite quickly, and I'll try and slow it down, but if you don't understand, please tell me. Okay. So, I also want to thank the organisers, particularly the Kuwait Life Science Academy, for this exciting opportunity, because this is a really important topic for all of us in the world trying to look at healthcare problems. Okay? And so I'm going to talk about this. Leadership is one of the topics that is quite dear to my heart, and the previous speaker has mentioned how important that is, but also interprofessional education is too. And the reason this is my 20th visit is Dundee University is running a master's programme in diabetes. Interprofessional education works, okay, here in Kuwait with the Dasman Diabetes Institute. Anyway, this is what I'm going to cover as quickly as I can. I'm going to look at the wickedness of healthcare problems. I'm going to explain to you what a wicked problem is, and healthcare reform is certainly that. I'm going to look at the gap between evidence-based healthcare, because we've heard a lot about how excellent it is, and it is truly, but as Professor Hoja said, it's difficult to then implement the guidelines into clinical practice, and I'm going to talk about that too. I'm going to look at the role of leadership, and I've talked about transformational leaders, and I'll tell you more about that, and also a customised approach to trying to approach this problem. And I'll do all this in 15 minutes, so here we go. Okay. So, what is a wicked problem? Well, it's sometimes easiest to consider what isn't a wicked problem, and this is some research done which classifies problems into tame, wicked, and critical, okay? So a tame problem is pretty straightforward. You get up in the morning, you're going to work, you try and turn on the car, it doesn't start, okay? What do? It's happened before, okay? There is a solution, which is to call the mechanic and to get a taxi to work, okay? So that's a tame problem. Wicked problems are much different to that, okay? They are much more complex and so often are intractable. They actually are unlikely to have happened before because the context is unique. Okay. There will be no stopping point, no solution, because if you think about healthcare reform, all that happens when we change healthcare is we get new problems. Okay. All the wonderful work we've done in managing long-term conditions means we have more complex comorbidity because people get older. Okay. And sometimes you have to choose the least bad option. Okay. There is a lot of uncertainty around in that. Okay. And the last one is the critical problem, which is pretty obvious, isn't it? That you need someone who is certain, who knows what to do and gets in and does it. Okay. The other thing I want you to do is think differently about what success looks like when you're looking at tame versus wicked problems, okay? So mostly success seems to be this linear path. You go from point A to point B, job done. Okay. But with wicked problems, actually, it's a lot messier than that. And we all know that working in healthcare. It's a very messy environment. There's lots of things going on, lots of agendas and lots of things. And the other thing about wicked problems is that very often there's lots of different solutions that you could choose and lots of different opportunities that you could embrace to change things. So why is healthcare such a wicked problem? Well, I could talk about complex comorbidity, the ageing population, the demographic type. I could talk about all these things, and you all know about them. But there are some other key parts to this. It's a wicked problem because of our individual expectations about what healthcare needs to look like. And for those of you that would realise that at the top right-hand corner, that is my impression of what healthcare should look like. That's Emergency Ward 10. It was a television series when I was growing up. And there's the traditional consultant and traditional British hospital. And down below is Dr. Finlay, who was the traditional GP who worked in a beautiful practice in Scotland. And that's what I think healthcare should look like, because that's what I was brought up to believe. In addition to that, as we've said earlier, there are an awful lot of people involved in healthcare, and particularly doctors, who are very powerful people because they have a lot of influence on patients, and they also cost a lot of money, and they spend a lot of money. Okay. Healthcare is enormously political. Okay. Politicians want to fiddle with it, they want to change it, and they want quick wins because they want to be re-elected the next time around. And they're not going to wait the 20 years it's going to take for changes to pan through and show real improvement. And as I've said, it costs a lot of money. Okay. So let's look a little bit about the gap. You would think there would be solutions that would come out of evidence-based practice to reform this problem. Okay. Well, the evidence is pretty compelling. Okay. When you have evidence, it's hard to ignore it. Okay. But it's also hierarchical. Most doctors believe that the gold standard is the randomized controlled trial. But when it comes to the messy world of healthcare reform, gold standards such as that, they take too long, they're too narrow, and they only give us very, very small answers to problems when actually healthcare reform is much more of a puzzle. So how do you bridge the gap between the two? And I thought, Engineer Mohammed, you might like that slide. I chose it especially for you, okay? An engineering solution. Well, if you look at the traditional approach to evidence-based practice, okay, you identify the problem, okay, you find the evidence, you come up with the theory, okay, and then you work on through, and then you come back around and look at the evidence, okay. But the world of design is teaching us something new, okay, because we know that that's very slow and it's very narrowly focused, okay. But when you start to look at the world of design, I'm going to talk a little bit about this, then they actually have a different approach to this. They look at things in a completely different perspective. And here is one of our professors in Dundee, Mike Press, and this is actually him working with the Scottish Government, would you believe, helping as a designer to help them look at how to reform public services. And so a little bit of it is like this, okay? The key part of this is that they have very similar cycle, but they do two things differently, okay? So they define the problem and they research into it. And then they prototype and test, and they do that quickly. Okay? They implement what seems to work, okay, and they evaluate. And the other thing they do is they value the richness of storytelling. Because when something's as complicated as healthcare, it's the stories in which you find the most relevant data. It's how it worked in practice, how healthcare professionals who know what they're doing made this work and changed behaviour. Okay? So the stories are very rich, but you can't do a randomized controlled trial on stories. Okay. So here we are, prototyping, remember, storytelling and evaluating. Okay, now I'm going to talk about leadership in all of this. Okay, so I could talk for a whole conference on leadership theory. It's been around a long time, and we can all think of different examples of great leaders and how we recognize traits and characteristics in them. But nowadays we talk much more about something called transformational leadership, and the project that we're doing with the Diabetes Institute in the Dasman Institute is exactly that. It's about a transformational change project, and our students are the leaders on that project. And interestingly enough, Walt Disney, great example of transformational leadership, he was a designer. Okay. Now for the theory, okay? Because I'm an academic, you have to have some. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work of Heifetz, okay, and what the components are of transformational leadership. And clinical leadership is transformational leadership, okay? That the leader doesn't know the answer, but understands the problem. You have that big picture of seeing the reality of what the problem is. That the role is more often to ask the right questions than to provide the answers, because team working is what makes modern healthcare so effective. Okay? That you need to help your followers accept their responsibility in working together to find the solution, which at times may be unpopular. Okay? That the solutions take a long time to establish, okay? And sometimes it's the least bad option. That's the 20-year thing I was talking about earlier. And that it needs constant effort to maintain improvements, and previous speakers have highlighted that as well. Okay. So what Heifetz talks about is this is a kind of 6 principles. And I'm going to give you some examples to help you understand them, because theory is theory. Okay? And these are the principles. Getting on the balcony, having the big picture. Seeing the challenge, and I mean the adaptive challenge, in which case the one that actually is fixable. Okay, there's loads of things you can't do anything about. Don't worry about them. Concentrate on the things you can change. Okay? And recognize that conflict is an important indicator of change. Where there's conflict, it's because things don't match up. And that's really important to realize. Okay? You need to adjust hearts and minds. Okay? People need to buy into this, as all speakers have said so far. You need to contain uncertainty. This is a messy world we live in, sometimes least bad option, remember. And you need to hold the environment for that, so people can do things that may fail, but it's okay for that to happen because they learn from it and move on. Okay. Once you start to change things, you can never go back to the way they are, much as you might like to. And don't even try to consider that. Okay? And you need to make sure that people have matched the task to their skills, to the time they have within their working day to do it. And you need to also protect the voice of leadership, by which we mean that you also need to hold the place where it's okay for leaders themselves to perhaps fail. Okay. So, let's look at it again. Getting on the balcony. I'm going to give you some examples to help you with this. Okay. So, here's an example of transformational change, okay? This little island off the Pacific coast, okay? Suddenly a volcano erupts and all this land comes out of the sea and there's this great land mass. And these two islands are now joined. Pretty transformational, I think you'd agree. Couldn't get much more transformational than that for these islanders, okay? But when you look at it from above and you have a different perspective, you can sometimes make some amazing connections, okay? And here's someone looking at it differently and thinks that now looks like Snoopy the dog. And he does look like Snoopy the dog, doesn't it? Okay. And of course, I could give you endless slides of wonderful words of wisdom from Snoopy the dog. I'm sure we can all remember them. Okay, so here's another more tangible example, okay? Apollo 13, okay? We all know the story. Some of us were old enough to have lived through it, okay? But anyway, basically, yes, a major catastrophe for NASA, okay? They loop the module around the moon, and as they're bringing the men back safely, they realize that carbon dioxide is building up, and they will die before they get back to Earth, okay? Pretty big problem, okay? And here is the leader, Gene Kranz, and what he did was, he came into this team of people and he says, we have to make this fit into this, using just that. And just that, by the way, was sticky tape, tubes, and a couple of kind of metal clips, really. Okay? And if you're a real geek and you want to know, that actually is the real bit of kit that they built. Okay? So they did this through a leadership style, which was about getting on the balcony. There's the big picture. Okay? What's the challenge? We've got to get the carbon monoxide down. Okay? How to adjust the hearts and minds. He needed to get his team to realize that they had one shot to fix this. But this was a team that always tried things out time after time after time before they actually did it. So until they were certain it was right, they wouldn't do it. That's what you would expect of NASA. But this time they had to just go for it. One prototype, one shot. And he needed to make sure they understood that. Okay? He contained uncertainty and he held the space for them while they did that. And we all know the outcome. Of course, they did it. Okay. Here's another one that one of my students in the room, she actually will recognize this one. Okay. This is something called the Marshmallow Challenge. How many people know about the Marshmallow Challenge? Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you're going to like this one. Okay. So basically, what you give is people 14 minutes, right? It's very precise. Okay. And you give them 20 sticks of spaghetti. Okay. 1 yard of tape, 1 yard of string, and 1 marshmallow. And the challenge is competitively to create the highest freestanding structure using just that with the marshmallow on top. Okay. Got it? Right. Okay. Who do you think performs well? Who do you think, if you take groups of individuals, who do you think would be best at this? Sorry? Children, yes. Why didn't you start with engineers? Okay. Because actually, reassuringly, engineers and architects actually do perform the best. But you're absolutely right. The best people really overall at doing it are children, graduates of high school, graduates at kindergarten. The worst, by the way, are graduates of MBA master's programs from Harvard. So there you go. Okay. So why do you think children are so good at this? They play. Yeah. They test out prototype after prototype after prototype. They're usually doing it all at once, okay, because nobody's trying to be the chief executive of Spaghetti Inc., okay? They're just trying out new things and they're learning from it, and they don't care about failing, so the holding environment is this is fun, okay? So it's a great example. Now a more serious one, okay? Nobody could possibly talk about leadership without considering Nelson Mandela, okay? And he changed, of course, a whole culture, a whole society in an incredible way in a very short space of time. And this is how he did it. He had the big picture. He kept it for decades, okay? He knew the challenge, and he kept to it, okay? And he certainly changed hearts and minds. And he did it by that approach that I just put up there, that he actually let go of a lot of things that didn't matter and he couldn't change. And he concentrated on the things he could change, okay? He certainly brought people with him, not just because of his charismatic personality, quietly as it was done, but because of his commitment and his authenticity. He had credibility because of what he had gone through. Okay, and this is my last and probably favourite example of all of them, was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, I really am old enough to remember that. I was saying to Jean, I remember coming home as a little girl from school and knowing my parents were scared. And I didn't know what they were scared about at that time, but of course, they were scared, that was during the 13 days of this. And they would watch the news before they would even speak to us. Okay? So this was an absolutely impending catastrophe. Okay, if this had gone wrong, then we would have had a nuclear war in 1962. And my parents could remember the last war, so they were not exactly happy about this. And yet Kennedy was the leader who saw us through that. And how did he do it? He did every single one of these steps. Okay? He had the big picture. Okay? He saw the challenges. He tested out lots of different approaches in a prototype-driven way. He tried, tested, modified, moved on. Okay? He had hearts and minds with him as much as he could whenever he could. Tough times, okay? He controlled distress. He showed us that uncertainty was okay because he had a vision, okay? And he had that holding environment. And I could go on and say more about it, but I won't. I think it's a wonderful example of things that actually you do need to consider when you're looking for transformational change. Okay? So where have we got to? We've looked at wicked problems and how they need lots of different solutions and how individual healthcare workers can do that. We've looked at prototyping, and you have to prototype, test, learn, prototype, test, learn. We've looked at having a different approach in terms of transformational leadership, and we've looked at the influence of other professional groups in helping us do that. Okay. As Einstein said, problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. We need to think differently. We need to, in healthcare, have 1,000 flowers blooming, 100,000 flowers blooming, to be honest. In Kuwait, in the diabetes program, we've had so far 660 workplace-based projects from our students in 3 years. That truly is an incredible achievement. That is 660 prototype approaches to changing healthcare here in Kuwait. And as I say, we're very, very proud of our students and the work done. Okay. I have nothing more to say, and I think I'm bang on time. Thank you very much.